Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a fantastic show for you this evening. I am so excited by this. Kurt Robinson, President and Chairman of Robinson Helicopter, is here, and we are kicking off a special vertical series of shows here on SocialFlight Live. The end of the show will tell you where we're going from here, but it is just a ton of fun. I'd like to get started with a few things. First of all, as many of you know, we were off last week, and we were off taking a trip, went down to Jamaica for some tourism, and I always like to include General Aviation when I do that. Anything that can be done there to fly, especially in other countries, and explore that. And so I'm going to share a couple quick pictures here for you, and hopefully encourage you to do the same. We hooked up with the folks at Airlink Express. Now, if you fly into Jamaica, one of the challenges there is you land at the main airport at Montego Bay, and it's such a gorgeous, gorgeous country, amazing culture, and yet the ground transportation is very challenging. But the air transportation through Airlink Express is so cool. So we were able to meet up with them. We flew in their aircraft, and you can kind of see here how we were able to go up and get a tour and travel around where we went to Negril. It's so gorgeous there, and it just transforms the experience. The difference between doing this in this manner and flying with the folks at Airlink Express versus getting in car transportation was literally like 2.5 hours of bumpy road and traffic versus taking like 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of just touring the island and then getting to where you need to go. It was absolutely fantastic. And so I just want to do a shout out to them, from the ramp and custom service agent, Leon Smith, our pilot, David Cadigan, who was absolutely fantastic. And thanks to owner and pilot, Howard Levy, who's just fantastic, just really great, and none of it would have come together without the woman behind the scenes, Lisa Jerry. And so just a thanks and encouragement to everyone. When you travel, try to indulge in some general aviation when you get out there. Try to experience what else is going on, and share and support everything. And that is directly connected to tonight's guest, because of course, when you go places, you can always tour by helicopter, and most of the helicopters that are going to be there are going to be Robinsons. So let's get started. First of all, tonight's broadcast is brought to us by Lightspeed and the amazing Delta Zulu headset with Canary carbon monoxide smart alert technology and their hearing acuity, delivering crystal clear flight communication tailored to your individual profile. It's just, if you have not tried the Delta Zulu headset, you need to get out there and try that. It's a safety wearable. It's a great item to have, and it's just so clear and crisp once you've tailored it to your own hearing. And it's the prize that we do in our Fly to Win challenge. We just gave away one. We're going to announce the winner at our next show, and now on April 1st, we're giving away another Delta Zulu. So all you need to do is get the SocialFlight mobile app for Apple and Android devices. There are tens of thousands of aviation events and destinations, and you're entered in the challenge by checking in to just one place. Now, to tonight's show. The Robinson Helicopter Company was founded in 1973 by Frank Robinson, whose vision was to produce the world's highest quality, most reliable helicopters in the most efficient and cost-effective way possible. And that is the key there, efficiency and cost-effectiveness, because that is not a hallmark of helicopters of the past. Tonight's guest, Kurt Robinson, has continued his father's tradition, building the company into one of the most iconic brands in aviation. Combined, the two-seat R22, the four-seat Piston R44, and the five-seat turbine R66 account for over 13,000 helicopters worldwide. While nearly everyone's familiar with the classic lines of a Robbie on the field, fewer also know that the company is also dedicated to research and development and cutting-edge technology, including an autopilot designed specifically for helicopters. So I'm going to bring Kurt on the line now, and please help me welcome to SocialFlight Live, Kurt Robinson. How are you doing, Kurt?
Hi, Jeff. Good to see you.
First of all, thank you so much for coming on the show. You have one, and your father built one of the most iconic names in aviation because there's just almost no direct competitor. It's really, really impressive what you've done. Tell me a little bit about starting out about with your father and kind of what it was like growing up with that family.
Well, my dad has always been interested in aviation since he was a young kid, and going to college. I guess today when people think about computers and IT and things and get in that interest, in that time period, if you think the late 40s, early 50s, helicopters were the new and marvelous thing. And he became fascinated with them and decided that he wanted to get a degree in engineering and work to help design and build helicopters. And he was more interested in personal style helicopters than, say, military or whatever. So when he graduated in 1957 from the University of Washington, he actually accepted a job at Cessna. And a lot of people don't remember that Cessna actually built helicopters for a couple of years and then decided to get out of the market. But he went to Cessna and started working with them. And then he actually went to several companies after that, after they pulled out, and went to 3 or 4 different ones, including like Command, and then of course at Bell Helicopters in Texas, and then he ended up at Hughes here in Los Angeles. And both at Bell and at Hughes, he had been working on just individually on his own about the possibility of a personal helicopter. And so this is like the mid to late 1960s, and he went first to the higher ups at Bell and said, hey, I got a great idea for a small 2-place helicopter that we could sell to the commercial market, the civil market. And they said, well, yeah, but the Vietnam War is going on and our military contracts are going nuts, and actually we're going to just stay that way. Well, then when he went to work for Hughes, he proposed the same thing, and they did the same thing to him. They said, well, it's an interesting idea, but the government is where it's at, and that's what we're devoted to. And so his epiphany was basically thinking that I'll bet if somebody just didn't do the commercial work, didn't do the government work, and just sat down and tried to make a low-cost helicopter with low overhead, I think we could be like a Cessna. I think we could do something like that. And so he had an investor at the time, a person that was building a home built. And they got together, and the gentleman, Gus LaFell, talked Frank into quitting his job at Hughes and just working out of our living room. And at that time, I was a sophomore in high school. And so I would come home every day, and he, along with a couple engineers, were drafting in our living room and working on the project. And Gus LaFell actually was retired. He owned LaFell Tubing and lived in Hawaii, and he had a machine shop downstairs. And his biggest thing was, I just want to make all the parts and the tooling if you'll let me, because he loved doing that sort of thing. So they had a great arrangement. And, from that, the 22 was born. And I think it first flew, 1975 was the first flight, but didn't get certified till 1979. So those were, to call them lean years, yeah, there's Dad. Call them lean years, that was an understatement. And of course, actually what you're looking at there is ship 2. Ship 1 actually went in the ocean. And you can imagine how scary and everything that was. It was it was during flight testing of it, and a gentleman actually calmly radioed back and said, I think I've lost my tail rotor. I need to go in the ocean. I'm going to be landing in the ocean. He set it down, and it took us 2 days to find the aircraft on the ground. And when we pulled it up, the whole thing is, if you can find it, you want to know what's wrong. And Frank looked at it, and he saw the aft casting had cracked, and he went back through all of his notes and all the calculations and realized that he'd made, an engineering error, so to speak, which to his son was, I found that somewhat humorous. But he did what Frank is known to do. He didn't just fix it. He made it about 5 times stronger. He said, I'm going to redesign that, and I'll make that so that never happens again. And to his credit, it's never happened again. So that's kind of the way he took off and got things going. And then once we certified in '79, we just kind of just one day at a time. You're just trying to get orders in and trying to deliver helicopters and trying to introduce the world to a new personal lightweight helicopter.
That's so amazing. I love the idea that this was literally a home business.
Well, that's all he could afford, right? I mean, he literally quit his job, he mortgaged the house, and we were just working. He was working out of the living room, and we had our garage was the shop. He actually had I think a Sears Craftsman lathe, and he had a couple other hand tools and drills and stuff that he would go and fool around with, and then give drawings to Gus, who would also to make the parts for him. And one of the stories that I love to tell, because it's pretty humorous, is when he went to design the tailrotor blades, most engineers would look at that and said, okay, how do you come up with the length of the blades and the width and everything? And you can go through a lot of mathematical calculations, and I'm sure our engineers today could design something, superior or perfect. But at the time, the length of our tailrotor blade was dictated by how big our oven was, because our oven was the bonding mechanism. So literally, we had strain gauges all out of our oven. We had everything sitting there, and with all the fixtures and stuff we made. And so all of the first blades for the 22 were all made in our oven at our house.
Oh, that's awesome. That is really, really fantastic. I love that. Like 1 minute it's getting your prototype blades going, and the next is Thanksgiving dinner. So
oh yeah,
that's
it just what do you need to do, right? And you just figure it out, So
and it sounds like you mentioned briefly one of the biggest differences, and certainly one of the big differences between helicopters and fixed wing aircraft is that helicopters were very primarily rooted in defense, in government stuff. It wasn't the other way around, where companies were building fixed wing aircraft and then trying to get government contracts for bigger things. It's the other way.
correct. Actually, most of the companies would do is they would go after military contracts, which had high overhead and costs and everything, but they would develop a helicopter for a military or government application. And then once that was done, if they thought that it also had a civil opportunity, then they would go ahead and market to the civil market. But of course, you have a helicopter that's designed from the ground up for particular attributes, and cost was never one of them. It was, look, I need this to be the fastest helicopter you can develop. I need it to have these carrying capabilities, and cost was really not the concern, especially in a wartime environment. It was, get me the best. Well, Frank came at it from a different way and saying, no, if I'm going to have somebody that needs to be able to afford it, and his ideal customer was himself, because he wanted to have his own personal helicopter. So everything that he designed, he wanted it to be, I don't want to have a lot of maintenance with it. I don't want to have to work on it a lot. So he tried to build reliability into it and dependability. And he got rid of a lot of items, on the helicopter. He had all sealed bearings. He had a lot of different things so that they didn't have to do a lot of maintenance on the helicopter, because he didn't want to do a lot of maintenance. And that resulted in a more dependable helicopter. And then of course, with the focus on cost, it got it down to an affordable range. I think the first time he went out and was advertising it or telling people, he was hoping to develop something that would cost less than $30,000. Now this is think about this as 1975, 1976. But that's what he hoped for. And actually, the first ships that came out, they were under $50,000 initially. But then the price, as time goes on, they quickly rise. So.
Yeah, but even when you compare 1975, 76, when you compare the cost of fixed wing aircraft at that time, that's cheap.
Oh yeah, it was, and it got people's attention, right? And the thing that made the 22, he was trying to design a small personal helicopter, but he also wanted performance. He wanted, something that was quick and maneuverable, which he designed. And it was not, It was not necessarily an easy helicopter to fly, but it was very dependable and reliable. And being so small and lightweight, it was incredibly quick and nimble,
Hmm.
which means that it really is a lousy trainer. You know, you want to have the had high inertia rotors, and it was something that most people, you wouldn't expect them to want to learn on. However, when people looked at the cost of learning on an R-22, it was half what it would be on any other helicopter. So that's what people use, and it came very quickly to grow into that market and to dominate that market. And the other area that it became incredibly successful one is the cattle mustering or cattle herding market, both in Texas and in Australia and New Zealand. Because of its quickness and its maneuverability, it just took that market over. And so with any product that you make, if you find that you can build something that is better than any other product out there, that's how you become a success. And that was really our stepping stones to get us started.
Wow. Did he have I mean, obviously his career was focused on helicopters. I mean, how far back was he getting involved in learning how to fly them and being passionate where he wanted to build something for himself?
Well, he learned to fly. He had a fixed wing license. He bought a small Luscombe back in the late 40s while he was starting to attend college. And he always just a joke. He said, yeah, all my friends went off and went skiing. And I didn't really care much for skiing, but I loved to fly. So I went out and bought a used Luscombe and I learned how to fly. And from there, it just, the bug of flight and aviation really grabbed him hard. And like I say, he was focused and really wanted to get involved in helicopters. And so he was studying all the manufacturers at that time and really wanting to go work for them. And when Cessna was going to do what he thought was a private helicopter, that really got his interest, and that's where he wanted to go.
Wow. So, I mean, one of the things that you mentioned, of course, is that the challenge on one hand, you're trying to build the most reliable, least expensive, durable, efficient aircraft. On the other hand, there does seem to be this balance of how do you make something that's nimble, but also easy to fly. And so what's your transition been as a company for kind of taking an aircraft that kind of would, a lot of cars were like that, right? Really sporty, really, but very challenging. And then you've got to take that secondary focus and say, now we need to make this easier to fly. What's that like?
Well, you focus on simplicity. And actually, even if you look at the 22, it is the model of efficiency and simplicity. Tried to get rid of anything that you didn't need. And also remember with the 22, because of the inertia in the rotor system and being so small, it makes everything quick. When you jump up then into a 44, which is a 4-place helicopter and much larger, a lot more inertia in the blades, everything kind of slows down. You go from a small sports car into mom and dad's Cadillac, that type of a transition. And so it just moves easier, and it's actually learning to fly in it is easier, but it's also more expensive because the fuel burn and the operating costs are higher. So if you're young and everything, then the 22 is great. The one thing that I've heard this, 1,000 times, if you learn to fly in a 22, you can fly in any helicopter. And that is, so many pilots, if they didn't learn in the military, they all learned on a Robinson. And ones that are in, much larger helicopters now with other brand makers and stuff, it is really fun to talk to them about, so how'd you get started? And you'll hear them all say, oh, I got started in a Robbie. I learned in a 22, and then I transitioned, got into the turbines and did this. And it's really fun now around the world how many people initially started in the Robinson. And what's nice to me and what I really enjoy is they have a soft spot for our product, and they know what it can do, and it challenged them, but it makes you a better pilot once you get your license.
Wow, you've done a lot of stuff over the years that has to do with training and a focus on that to make that a little easier for people, because obviously we don't want the bar to be too high on a trainer. What have you done and kind of what do you offer in terms of training and also maybe what's involved in the aircraft, even of a 22, to make it a little more manageable?
Yeah, we don't do the primary or the beginning training in helicopters. That is done. Well, we have 120 dealers around the world, and we have actually about 460 service centers that maintain them, and many of those are flight schools. So the primary or initiate training is done outside, not at the factory. What we did develop and what Frank worked on in the early 80s, after there was a number of accidents and he could see that actually what he found was that the training was all different and instructors were approaching things differently, and depending on what their background is, how they learn. So he wanted to try and make it the same so that instructors, when they came and they flew on a 22, that they understood the difficult maneuvers and the things that pilots had to be aware of. And we wanted to show them, look, if you're going to teach about this, this is how we would suggest doing it. And from that, it developed our RHC safety course, which initially was just for instructors, but pretty soon all of owners and pilots and everybody wanted to attend the RHC safety course, which is a 3.5-day course. It goes on to this day. And it literally is 2.5 days of classroom instruction. It's no bones. This is, what we know about the helicopter. We start out telling people, look, flying is dangerous. It's like riding a motorcycle. Just because you're way up in the air, it doesn't get safer. And you have to, there's 3 different controls, and it's a skill set, and you always have to be aware of it. And so we walk through and we show everybody what can happen and how to avoid it. And it's been an incredibly successful course through all these years. In fact, almost all the insurance companies, if you take the course, and they will give you a discount on your insurance.
Wow. So take me back to obviously, as you mentioned, we were back at the beginning of the company, and then as it moved on, given that your age, you were right in the sweet spot to be learning how to fly them and to start kind of getting some stories out there as you were growing up of doing a lot of these things. Tell me a few things about what life was like back then when you're either delivering them or demoing the helicopters.
Well, first I'll tell you that I went out of high school, and then I went down to college, and then I actually came home and worked for a couple years at the company. We were just getting started, 1979, 1980. And during that time, we talked about me getting my license, but Frank also knew that I was going back to college to finish my graduate degrees. And he looked at me and he said, flying is a skill, and until you're really willing and ready to dedicate the time each week, because it's like playing an instrument. You need to get good at it, and you want to stay competent at it. Then I think you should wait till you get done with your college degree and then get your license. So it was an agreement we made. And when I came back, then first thing I did was got my license and learned how to fly, and committed to flying so many hours a week. And then of course that once you get your license, and I got my commercial, there was a lot of flying jobs at the company to be done, and I was more than happy to do a lot of those. And it is interesting. It's really fun to get to know your own product and what people talk about flying, the joys of it, the things that are difficult, so you can really understand it. And it's a background that's helped. But in the early years, just going all over the country was just a blast. And it was to go, I've been to Florida, I've been up into Canada, all over the United States flying. And the coolest thing about flying is you get out of the big cities, and if you're trapped in a city, you think that the whole world is like this. You go flying, and within a short period of time, you're outside of the city. The country is wide open. I don't think people realize how big of a country this is, how many places you can go where you can be totally alone. You really can be. And if you're flying along the freeways and you see something over a hill that really interests you, in a car, you can say, I wonder what's over there. Well, in a helicopter, you say, I wonder what's over there, and you just go over and look, and you go over that hill at top, and you see what's there, and a lot of times you'll suddenly discover a lake or something that you never knew was there, and then you go ahead and you land and you check it out, and it's a lot of fun, So I did that quite a bit, And flying, some of the most fun parts to do is when there's other helicopters involved. You have a flight of 2 or 3 helicopters, and you all take off, and you're flying together, not necessarily in a tight formation, but you're just going together. And of course, you know, everybody just goes, all right, just use frequency 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Just go on that. We can talk to each other unless other people come on, and then we'll switch it. And you'd fly along, and you'd be talking like they're in the back seat, and then enjoying the flight and sharing what you're seeing and what you're doing. And it's a lot of fun. Anybody that can do it, I encourage it wholeheartedly. It is a blast.
It's so interesting to me. I mean, you know, STOL flying and backcountry flying with fixed wing aircraft it really captivated so many minds and taken on such a huge persona, and people like watching, you know, all these different cool places to fly and things to do. But helicopters, and especially your helicopters, are a level beyond that, because almost nowhere is off limits as long as it's safe to get in and out. You can actually go and see anywhere and just put it down. Tell me, okay, like some stories or anything that comes to mind that you may have done in the past where you literally decided, we're just gonna put it down right here.
One of the first things I'll say is, over the years, our helicopters have actually, they've been all over the world. They have flown around the world. Jennifer Murray is the first woman to fly around the world in a helicopter. She did it in our 44. They've been to the North Pole. They've been to the South Pole. So they are everywhere, and it's really, really fun getting the stories from people of the different places that they've landed and where they've gone. And, you know, as I've flown, especially early on when it was considered more of a novelty, and it was kind of a surprise to people. I remember flying with another gentleman. We were going to Dallas, Texas, and we had some headwinds, and it was getting kind of late. And we were like, well, we still got another hour and a half or so to go. And we're flying along the interstate, and then all of a sudden we saw this Holiday Inn. It's kind of on the left down there. And we just said, you know, why don't we just go ahead and put it down here? And I hope the owner doesn't mind, but we saw the parking lot in the back was pretty big, and so we stayed away from the cars. And so we set it down, shut it down, and walked up to the front desk and told the person who happened to be the owner of the hotel, we said, you know, just so you know, we landed our helicopter in the back of your facility there, and we're going to take off tomorrow morning and go, and I hope you're okay with that. And the guy looked at us and he said, really? He goes, show me that. And he goes walking outside, and he takes a look at the helicopter. I believe we were in a 22 at the time. And he goes, I tell you what, you can leave your helicopter here under one condition. And we're like, okay. And he said, I want you to move it to the front on the grassy knoll we have there, so everybody can see it. He says, I think that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I want to see you do it. So I picked the helicopter up, I repositioned it to the front, and we spent the night there, and that gentleman was the happiest guy in the world. It was a fun trip. And actually, when you're traveling cross country, one of the things that I can't say enough of, and I don't care if you're in America or any foreign country, going to some of the smaller airports and some of the families that run them and have them, they can't be nicer than people. I mean, people in aviation are just great. And it is so fun to land at some little airport, and I have people just say, here, take my old car in the back if you want to go into town, do whatever. They're just great. And it is really, it warms your heart to see how some people are in America when you get away from the hustle and bustle and competitiveness of the city. And it's great. It's really fun.
Yeah, you know, as you may have seen at the beginning of the show when I was talking about Airlink Express down in Jamaica, if any time that you can incorporate that, even in regular travel, you're taking an airline somewhere, you're doing something, if you see that, which is often at the same airport, you see like the helicopter tour or something like that, it's a different experience, I think, when you go up to them and you say, hey, you know, I'm a pilot, and I want to sign up for one of the rides with you or something. There's this camaraderie, and you're helping to support them. You're getting this experience. You usually get a different one when you tell them you're kind of part of the general aviation community, and it's just such a wonderful thing to always add. I love adding that no matter where I go.
One of the nice things, you know, when you go into a strange city, and when I've traveled abroad to the dealers, everything, that first thing they offer me is always a helicopter ride to see the city. But when you see something from the air, it's kind of like Google Maps, right? And then once you're on the ground and then you're driving around, you're like, oh, I get it. Now I know where we are. And it is weird. It just gives you a better sense of the city. But when you do tours, it's great. But also, one of the beauties of a helicopter is you don't have to stay on the tour, right? You can say, let's go over there, or let's go somewhere different and explore. And being able to explore in a helicopter, there's nothing like it.
So I've heard you describe helicopters and helicopter flying as kind of like the last Wild West of what you can do. Tell me a little bit about that, where we are today and that you can still do some of that.
So many of the people that own our helicopters and fly them, and obviously we do cattle mustering. They are in so many different ranches and on farms and all around the world. And whenever we get together at the different conventions, HAI, whatever, and you meet these people, really the best way to describe them, it is like the last bastion of cowboys. There is an element of skill and danger involved with flying, and it just attracts a great group of people. And both men and women, some of the best pilots I've ever met are women, and I really enjoy flying with them and talking with them, or just anybody that has a love of aviation. It's just great, and you really do like to get into it, and they're just good people. They really are.
Wow, and I will say, as a boy that did not grow up on a ranch, cattle mustering. Tell me about like helicopters used for that, and some of the other kind of more interesting things that you've had customers use the helicopters for.
Well, cattle mustering is interesting because, I mean, think of it as a horse that, you know, you're trying to move the cattle around. Well, you can do it a lot more efficiently with a small light helicopter like the R-22. And what's interesting is if I go out to a farm and I place a 22, a 44, and a 60, a turbine helicopter, and I look at somebody and say, I need you to go, you know, muster cattle. You take whatever helicopter you want, right? I'll pay it what they will always go to a 22 because of its quickness, its nimbleness. And if you watch some of these pilots and how skilled they are, they just dance around that cattle and they can move them around. And with a piston engine, you know, when you pull in the throttle, that power is there instantly. Whereas, you know, if you have a turbine helicopter and you pull in, you have that little slight lag as it spools up. So actually, the lighter, cheaper 22 does that particular job better than a turbine helicopter. Now, there's other things that you want to do with a turbine. You can have altitude performance. Obviously, you can get larger, and so you can get faster in speed. Where it's nice to have a turbine, but each helicopter has its own benefits and its own, you know, promises type of thing.
Wow, that and I mean, are there other types of things that you've seen that you were surprised when people told you they were doing with the helicopter?
Some of which I can't talk about, but yeah. Well, just actually, the coolest thing is some of the things I mentioned just briefly. The fact that we've had people, a lot more than one person has flown to the North Pole in our helicopters, and that, I mean, you talk about needing something that's reliable, you know, and that's dependable. That type of adventure and that type of exploring or traveling around the world, going into areas that when you land and turn off that helicopter, particular if I go back to like the 90s when, you know, we didn't have cell phones. So when you turned off that helicopter, if that thing didn't start, you were in a whole world of hurt. And those type of adventures are just phenomenal. And the things that people have told me and where they've gone, and some of this, the wildlife in Africa, and some of the things that they've done there for animal protection, that, you know, protecting elephants and rhinos and what have you. It's just amazing what they do with the helicopters, and then just the countries themselves. And you know, unfortunately, we're in a conflict with Russia right now, but it was a very popular place for the helicopters. There was a lot of areas where people went, and China. I mean, you start naming a country, and there's areas that if you have a helicopter, it just turns it into a whole different experience.
That certainly makes a lot of sense. I'm also amazed at how a lot of people don't realize how the pilot crisis itself of lack of pilots has really exacerbated what happens in the helicopter world. When we met a couple when we were out on our trip that was talking about their company of medical transportation, and that they just can't find helicopter pilots. It's just very, very difficult. And how many scholarships are available for people interested in doing it by organizations, especially if you happen to be a woman looking to do it or anything like that. There's so many organizations that are out there offering training, because we just need to fill these spots with whoever is qualified and can take it. And we need to get
right
more people
now is a
interested.
great time. If you want to get involved in flying or you have an interest in aviation, you're absolutely right. There are people that are really looking hard for pilots, and everybody steals from each other. And flight schools are they're booming, and they need instructors. And so it is. I can't think of it's a great industry to get involved in and to grow. And of course, a lot of those people that started out as students, they now own a dealership, and they do all things flying, and it's great. And one thing I will say, particularly about women, is remember in the helicopter industry, size and weight matters. And if you tend to be a little shorter and a little bit lighter, that's a good thing in helicopters, because you have a maximum gross weight, and so you can carry more. And it's one of the nice things that you have in helicopters. It's an advantage for the person who's mid-size or slightly smaller. That actually works for you very well when you do tour operations and other things in helicopters.
Yeah, you can't mess around with gross weight in a helicopter.
Oh yeah, no.
It's not like saying you're just going to fudge it in a fixed wing plane and go a little faster, which no one should. But I mean, you really can't get away with it in a helicopter.
No, flying has to be and always should be taken very seriously. And just because you have 5,000 hours or 10,000 hours, the most important flight is the next one. And it doesn't, just because you've done it, 1,000 times before, it doesn't make it any easier or any safer. You have to have the same respect and follow it the same way when you fly. And too many accidents we see is people get complacent or they're not watching what they're doing. One of the things I had seen and read that just bothers me is that wire strikes, which is one of the most common things in aviation and helicopters, is that they said that over 60% of the wire strikes that occurred, the pilot knows the wire's there. You just get distracted, you get complacent, you're not thinking about it. And that's the best thing I can tell people. You need to always be attentive, and every flight you have to give it your on. But that also makes it what's interesting and fun and enjoyable to be a pilot, is the skill level and the fact that when you're flying, you don't think about anything else but flying. And it's really the nicest thing in the world.
Let's talk about that for a minute. When it comes to technology, wire strikes are something that you don't think about as much in fixed wings, but it's very primary in rotorcraft. And I started in the avionics business with a focus, since we always did synthetic vision development, and big part of that was, can we put wire, can we put the technology into synthetic vision, see that, map it out? What have you guys been involved in to help, or anything having to do with wire strikes? Because that seems to be the big issue.
There is, I mean, the advancement and development and technology that's come along in aviation is just fantastic. What it was in the 80s compared to what it is now with the autopilots, the SAS systems, where they can mark and identify wires. It really has come a long way. Now literally with an autopilot or a SAS system, I can take a helicopter and actually take my hands off the controls. Which is, something you want to keep on there, but it shows the level of how it's made it simpler and easier to fly. But you still have to pay attention. You still have to be very much cognizant of what you're doing as you fly along. but the helicopters today, I mean, just GPS, which now everybody takes for granted in your car. But think about it when, 20, 30 years ago, before that was available, you had a map laid out beside you, and you're looking at the map going, well, I think that road down there is the one that's on this map, and I'm not sure. You call into a tower, and you would say approximately 10 miles southeast on the such and such freeway, transitioning northbound, and you were guessing. But now when you have with GPS, when you call into a tower and you say, I am 3.4 miles southeast, you are 3.4 miles southeast. There's no question about it. And it's a wonderful thing for a pilot. It gives you, a warm and comfortable feeling as you fly. And it allows you, instead of trying to look at instruments and other things to fly, it allows you to keep your eyes outside, be looking for birds, wires, what have you. And that, translates into a safer flight.
Wow. And with technology, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, you've been very involved in adding things like autopilots, as you mentioned. I think a lot of people don't realize how little helicopter flying in general is done kind of IFR or in that world, and with autopilots. That's a lot more recent. Even when I've talked to folks that fly S-76s, huge helicopters, they don't do a lot with things that are either
you want to be
autopilot-based
VFR, you want to see it, and helicopters, when they fly, they can go special, meaning I can stay clear of the clouds and I can fly in these conditions. But that balance and making certain that you're flying properly, you really do need to be VFR. The one of the goals of the industry is to get to a single engine IFR helicopter, and I think that is coming along, and that will happen, but that obviously is going to require a SAS system and autopilot that is helping you fly in those conditions. And then it's getting the reliability up there, which is every day we're getting closer and closer.
Can you help people understand what is a SAS system?
That is, in essence, an autopilot. It's what you would call it. I'm gapping on the words, but it allows the helicopter with gyros to stabilize, and using the instruments on board the helicopter, it keeps it straight and level for you, and you can literally dial in a turn. You can dictate an altitude so that it will maintain the stability of the helicopter with the gyros that are on board. An autopilot puts it the next step forward, where you can actually pick a destination. You can go, tell it where you want to go or in a bank, and then it will perform those maneuvers for you.
Well, I find it interesting and fascinating that with single engine regular fixed wing aircraft, there's no issue. We always think about flying IFR in it, but that helicopters are limited, and the FAA hasn't changed that when it comes to a single engine, that they require twin engine to do that. And yet your R66 has over 1 million flight hours on it without a single engine failure. That's a lot of flight hours to restrict everybody from IFR.
You're preaching to the choir, but it's it is the reliability is something we're very proud of. I know Rolls-Royce is extremely proud of it, and the piston engines, those are just as reliable. And Frank did something unusual when he designed the 22 and the 44 to get reliability. Is he derated the engine, meaning that when you tend to fly a helicopter, you set it at like full throttle or max throttle, so that you hover and use the power. You don't really change throttle settings much. But what he did is he made it so that you're not flying at the maximum, you're flying less than that. And that gave you power as you climbed up in altitude. It allowed you to have reserves. And then also, because now the engine wasn't working as hard, it allowed us to have more time between overhauls and to extend the life of the engine and the airframe, so that you could fly longer.
Yeah, I know that you're a big proponent of the reliability of piston engines, which usually, and you would think that Robinson with the R22, the 44, and then the turbine 66, you would think that you're so well positioned to be pushing folks in that direction and using the word reliability, but but that's not actually the case. You're a strong supporter of piston reliability. Tell me more about that.
Oh, absolutely. Again, it kind of goes back to what we say in the beginning. You want to pick the aircraft that performs the job that you need to do the best and that can do it economically. And so, like a lot of tour operations things, on 44 is perfect for those type of jobs. At 22, learning how to fly. Again, we talk about cattle mustering, where it's the best aircraft to perform that particular type of application. And doing spray work. The 44 and actually the 66 works pretty well on that one, but anything low to the ground, the piston engine is turned out to be, in the Lycoming, the 0540 and the 0360 are incredibly dependable engines, and they have a low fuel burn, a low operating cost, so they make them the right engine for that job. And it has been something that in the industry, early on in the early 60s, the military wanted to go to turbines because they believed that they were more reliable. Well, we kind of came back and said, it kind of depends on how they're maintained, how they're using, and you can design one that will be extremely dependable. And that's what we did with both the R22 and the 44.
Wow. I mean, yeah, the reliability obviously is dramatic. Tell me a little bit more about the utility that you've done. You mentioned spraying. I know back in 2018, you guys added a cargo hook, which isn't something that you think about generally with Robinson, and yet they're pretty cool to see that happening. You've done things with pop-out floats. Tell me about all the different things people add.
There's various applications. We have a float ship for flying over water. We obviously have a cargo ship. Early on, I think somebody developed a cargo hook for the 22, but being a very small helicopter, you're not going to carry that much.
You got to carry your lunch.
Yeah, yeah, you couldn't carry a lot, but they're a little small Bambi bucket. But the 44 has that, and obviously the 66 can carry considerably more. But then also ag spraying has turned out to be a very good use of both the 44 and the 66. We also have police helicopters that have been developed that have the FLIR on the nose and the searchlight, and those are used by a lot of municipalities. And then we have also the Newscopters. And actually on the police helicopters, I guess Polk County sheriffs in Florida, they have several of our 66s, and they were telling us that literally for the cost that it was costing them to operate a larger turbine helicopter, they can actually run 3 of ours for the same price. And
wow.
So when municipalities and cities look at what they're doing and they become cost conscious, then all of a sudden it falls into and becomes a perfect application for what we do.
I mean, I was going to ask that, like whether you have seen a lot of transition from the classic kind of like Jet Ranger, Jetstar, A-Stars, things like that people are using that you think of with news helicopters or police, and starting to see a lot of it transition over to Robinson helicopters for the efficiency and economics.
We do, and we have seen that, and it really, again, it comes down to the mission that needs to be performed, and how many people need to be on board, and what type of equipment, whether it's a FLIR, a camera system. The newscopter industry is something that has grown dramatically, and you never see us advertise it, but all the TV stations, there's all around the United States and Brazil and around the world, we actually sell quite a few of them because they are very cost efficient, and they, you get cameras on there that can do 32x with a 2x extender, so they can go 64x. It's amazing the digital images that they can take, and you have 4K cameras, and I mean, it's just amazing what we've seen them develop into.
Wow. Robinson helicopters have a very unique look, right? You can it doesn't seem to have changed from the 22 and just scaled up through the 44 and the 66, and it's different than what you see. I think other turbine helicopters have kind of tried to emulate, with almost trying to understand what the form versus function is on those. Is that something that you've ever played with or looked at or like changing?
Frank studied that very heavily when actually the McCulloch autogyro, the plug that was used on the 22, Frank got it from the old man McCulloch or whatever. That's how he used to refer to him. He let him have that plug when they decided to get out of helicopters. And Frank had been very intense on trying to find the most efficient aerodynamic design that he could, particularly when you're trying to design a small, lightweight helicopter like the 22. Well, once you come up with that shape, as you start to get bigger, you just kind of build off of that. So it does start to have a very, very distinctive styling and design, but it's incredibly efficient. It's kind of like a Porsche 911, right? I mean, once they got that design and you look at the ones they have now, there's a lot of, it's evolved, but it still has that aerodynamic shape. And that's what we found with the 22 and the 44. And some of the things that are happening now that you see, and you see people talking about eVTOLs and, drone-like things. A lot of them are using 22s and 44s because of the efficiency, because it doesn't take a lot of power and they can do the job really well. So they start with our aircraft and then try and develop something else. And that's flattering to say the least.
I can imagine, and I mean it just makes perfect sense. You go with efficiency, and then you keep building on that. We've certainly had quite a few people chime in asking questions about whether what level of pressure you've gotten from the experimental market over the years, of folks, because obviously there's a little bit of a footprint there for some people have played with it, but not much.
We love the experimental market, Oshkosh, and the people there. That's where you find some of the most unique and innovative ideas. And a lot of times, some of the things that we've incorporated into the aircraft, they start out in, whether it's avionics or some other things, you can see it in the experimental aircraft category, and then it develops up. But from the early on, Frank wanted to make certain that he had a certificated aircraft, because with experimental, you are limited in where you can fly and who you can carry, and there's a lot of restrictions. But if it's a certified aircraft, then you can you can take passengers and you can go all over the United States or other countries or whatever. Whereas in a kit helicopter models, there are definite restrictions and things that apply to you. And he just liked the level of detail and the requirements that it would take to give you a more reliable, dependable helicopter.
That makes perfect sense.
We've always been in the commercial market or in the certified market and really haven't looked at or thought about playing in the experimental market.
I'm curious about your thoughts on the whole urban air mobility trend, right? Because when I think of everybody's been talking about all the different ways of urban air mobility and what's going to happen with these large automated or even piloted aircraft. But the reality is helicopters do that. And perhaps there's going to be an efficiency growth in it. But what are your thoughts on this future of urban air mobility?
Well, I think there's a huge market for it. And and you're right, we are positioned perfectly to be in it. We do see our helicopters used in some applications. The biggest thing is noise and traveling in, if you go into an area, and it's really is designating and finding an area where you minimize the noise impact, and there's things that you can do and things that we're always working on our design to make the helicopters, quieter and to fly neighborly and get into areas where they're used a lot. Some of this, the eVTOL or the electric vehicles, some of them coming along with more rotors, they are a little bit quieter, but that also raises the cost. And it's really the battery technology that I am certain it will evolve and come about. I just think that a lot of people are a little bit premature on the current capabilities, because remember, a helicopter is really flying at max power, so it's especially in a hover, it has a high drain on the batteries. And most of the eVTOLs that you see now, they've kind of drifted away from the straight helicopter concept to almost like a tilt rotor, where they get you up and then get you out so they can transition and use the wing of the aircraft to support lift and to to be able to reduce power. But I think the days will come, but it's probably still a ways off. And when it does, we'll be right there. And it's something that we monitor carefully, and we put our toe in the water in various areas, and we want to keep supporting it and look forward to when the technology is available to go in that direction. Just like we weren't always a piston helicopter company, then we became a turbine, and now if eVTOL, when the right power plant evolves and is here, then we'll put it in our aircraft.
Is there anything anything at all you can tease us with that's happening? I mean, we've got 22, 44, 66. I'm sure the next logical 88 maybe, or anything else on the horizon?
Well, you know what, we study the industry. We get so tremendous feedback. You talked about the fact that we have over 13,000 aircraft. We actually have over 13,800. I think by the end of this year, we're going to break that 14,000 mark. Flying around the world, we get tremendous feedback and desires and wants from people. The one thing I can tell you is we probably won't go smaller. I don't think you'll ever see anything smaller than the 22. But obviously, and we look to fill a marketplace or a gap. We don't want to build a Me Too product, never have. And each of our aircraft that we designed were designed hopefully to go into a void in the industry where people didn't have something available, and we've been able to find that market. And so as we look to something like an 88, it will likely be larger, not smaller. And it's something that we're looking at. But again, we go back to, we need efficiency. We need to find the right power plant. We need to look at cost. And then we study the jobs and things that it can do and do well. And so we are working on those. You know, I teased you a little bit with the single engine IFR. That is something we've been working on for years and years. And as it develops, that's something that would be a holy grail, because that would allow you to, you know, to make a reservation and say, I want to go from Torrance to Van Nuys next Thursday. Well, if you come into Torrance next Thursday and it's foggy, we're not going anywhere, right? And whereas airlines, they fly IFR all the time. They just assume it, even on a bright and sunny day. They know they can do that flight. So to get to that point with helicopters would be a huge opportunity and allow that eVTOL and that landing in cities, because then you can schedule and plan on it. And so that's an area that I think development as the years go by, that hurdle will be crossed.
That makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, as you mentioned, by going bigger, that gap seems to be, you know, real transportation, oil platforms, getting back and forth, going to different things where your goal is to load as many people in the trip efficiently as you can. That seems to be an opportunity there. Am I off base?
No, you're right on. And actually, I mean, what our strength is with our factory here, and we haven't even gone into manufacturing, which is actually a very fun area, but we really do look to reduce costs. We bring things in-house. Back in the 90s, when everybody was outsourcing, we were doing just the opposite. We were trying to bring it in-house, not because we necessarily save money, but we could do two things. One, we could do our own scheduling, and then two, we could ensure the quality of the product by building it in-house. So we have invested millions of dollars in very complicated, very high-end machining equipment so that we could do that. So
I'm going to show a picture of that facility because I want to make sure that that we get to that. And that is not a small building.
Oh yeah, 600,000 square feet. And I'm going to run into a problem here because I'm getting a low battery on my
Okay.
laptop.
We're at the end of the hour anyway, but I'd just like to thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us here on the show. It really is a wonderful, wonderful both family and American business success story. And I love that you've kept the manufacturing in-house, you've done everything there, and you've truly changed an industry. And I really look forward to seeing your handprint on what happens to the future of transportation.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed being on your show, and hopefully we'll see more people that'll take up flying, because it is a fabulous industry.
Absolutely. Well, have a wonderful evening, Kurt, and thanks for joining us here on SocialFlight Live.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Take care.
And thanks to you for joining us this evening and taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live, and for everything that you do to support General Aviation. Really do appreciate it, and would love to hear your own personal stories of what you do while traveling and how to experience General Aviation in every way possible. Now, we will be back next Tuesday, February 20th at 8 p.m. with the incredible Kenny G. He is a musician and pilot of a de Havilland Beaver, has some fantastic stories. Cannot wait to have him join us here on the show and share those stories with you. Then on Thursday, February 27th, we continue our vertical aviation series with Congressional Medal of Honor winner Major General Patrick Brady. His stories, if you want to look him up, is absolutely unbelievable, of flying in Vietnam and doing helicopter dust-off missions there and rescue missions. And then on Tuesday, March 5th at 8 p.m. Eastern, as always, aerobatic helicopter pilot Chuck Aaron will be here on the show. Until next time, I'm Jeff Simon for Social Flight. Blue skies.